Welcome to the Ayn Rand Fan Club. I'm Scott Schiff along with William Swig. William, how's it going?
It's going well. How are you?
Good, good. Well, we're pleased to have with us Clubhouse phenom and Ayn Rand fan, known by his nom de guerre, Roger Mayhem. Roger, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me, guys. I am excited to have a chat with y'all.
Yes, I've been looking forward to this. One of the main reasons I wanted to have you on is that I've watched you build a huge community of liberty-minded people who follow your debates and discussions on Clubhouse. I've seen the other Ayn Rand groups get a couple of dozen people in their Clubhouse discussions, where yours are getting hundreds, even thousands. You've got like 16,000 followers to your Healthy Debates group. Can you just give us a brief history of your background, how you got into Rand, experiences in the liberty movement?
Yeah, no problem. So when I was first able to vote, it was 1992, and I didn't really follow politics at all. But I realized that I'm going to get the chance to vote for a president, and I thought that was exciting. So I started paying attention, and the first person that I voted for, of all people, was Ross Perot. That was in 92. Okay. And my reason for it had nothing to do with politics. It had to do with Dana Carvey was doing impersonations of Ross Perot on Saturday Night Live, and I thought that those were hilarious. And so being an 18-year-old kid that doesn't know politics and being asked to pick the leader of the free world, why wouldn't you just go with the mockery that you see on Saturday Night Live? So that was quite literally why I decided to vote for Ross Perot. But that also set me on a path of, when I voted for Perot, people asking me the question, who did you vote for? And when I said that I voted for Perot, I was met with this, oh, you're such a rebel. And then from there, it almost kind of led into like this identity thing of like going against the grain politically.
I can relate.
It happened jokingly, but what that led to was me reading like, okay, well, who are these political philosophers and just philosophers in general that might go counter to some of the popular narratives that are out there? And around 94, about 2 years after that, is when I first read Atlas Shrugged. That, like many of the listeners that you have and many people around the world, that's an impactful moment when you read that. First of all, it's an intimidating read. It's a big book, and so when you pick that up and you read it, you don't just read through it. You kind of got to immerse yourself in it, and that led me into thinking differently, not just about politics, but about the world in general and my role in it. And that made me want to learn more about this author. And that led me into getting just more curious about philosophy in general, which led me to, doing a lot of reading of Aristotle. And that was really the kickoff point was reading Atlas Shrugged. I have to imagine that's a similar path to how a lot of people discover Rand.
Yeah, I read Rand in college, but one of my friends introduced me to the philosophy. How did you get introduced to the book? How did you learn about the book, and what motivated you to read it?
So there was friends of mine that were really into politics, and we would get into debates, and I didn't understand the inner workings of everything. And so they were so well educated, but we get in these conversations, and a lot of the things that they said just didn't feel right to me. A lot of like policies that, well, hey, that doesn't really make sense. Like there was all this almost like punitive policy prescriptions that were being made. And even though I didn't understand politics, I thought, I need to explore this more, because none of this stuff makes any sense to me. And so when I started talking, about my disagreements, somebody had said, you sound like a Randian. And I didn't even know what that meant. And if I would have taken it as a huge compliment. And so I was referred to as that before I even, began reading. And so when I pick up the book and I'm reading it, then I'm realizing that like, well, maybe there's some things that, instinctually I just know to be true, but it did feel like new information to me for sure, because nobody spoke like this. Nobody, the concepts of, just, self-interest, and that there's virtue in self-interest. Everybody else was all about altruism. And if you leave it to certain people to create that narrative, you would believe that that's the only path. And I think in exploring Rand, it opened up my eyes that like what people that identify as being altruistic really want is they want people to be free. They don't really know how to get there. And I think what Rand does is creates a framework with the idea of individualism and embracing egoism as something that's not a bad thing. And in fact, if you take care of yourself and you're invested in your own rational self-interest, you're in such a better place to be able to voluntarily care for others. And so I don't believe that you can be altruistic if you don't take care of yourself. And so that was really the things that resonated for me. As I've learned more about her philosophy, I've realized that I can't fully call myself an objectivist because despite the work that the Atlas Society does, and I have a lot of respect for them, I tend to believe that it is a closed philosophy, and it is what Rand says it is. And I'm a deist. I believe that there is a creator. And I think that puts some distance between me and being an objectivist. Although with the reframing by the Atlas Society, I certainly could embrace their ideas because it's a little bit more open of a philosophy. But I don't think it's objectivism. I think it's some sort of add-on or some sort of offshoot of objectivism. But I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts of whether or not you think that that's correct.
We did a whole show on it, actually. William may be a little more in agreement with you. I'm more on the open side. We don't have to.
Yeah. Just real quickly, though. So the deism part wouldn't fit with objectivism. And I would like to discuss that with you later. But the closed open debate, that's a hot topic in objectivism. And my take on it is that they're working with two different definitions of objectivism. So the closed objectivists, which I kind of lean towards favoring, they see it as the name of something, the name of a philosophy, which was Ayn Rand's philosophy. And then I think the open objectivists, they see it more as like a category of philosophies that fall under the heading of objectivism. So you believe the essentials of the philosophy, but then you kind of apply it in different ways.
Yep, I agree with that. Yep.
Yeah, but I mean, and that's fine. I mean, you definitely qualify to join the fan club anyway. But so you've been kind of around the liberty movement between, then and when Clubhouse started. You've seen some of the schisms and.
Yeah, so I started identifying as a libertarian probably right around the time that I read Atlas Shrugged. So let's go back to like say 94-ish. But I didn't know what to do with it. I didn't take it serious as a political party for sure. And then maybe around 2008, I got a little bit more excited about libertarianism when Ron Paul was doing his thing, although he was doing it within the confines of the GOP. And but I thought a lot of his messaging resonated with me. And then it wasn't until about a year ago, right when I got on the Clubhouse app, that I met Spike Cohen, who ran for VP for the LP. And I started hearing some of what he was laying out. And he was the one that convinced me to get off the couch and and join the party. Now, what's interesting is this year has been an interesting one because I'm I'm certainly more libertarian than I've ever been. But the party, I do still have questions whether or not it's certainly not the only vehicle to spread liberty. And I'm coming to the conclusion that it's not even the best vehicle to spreading libertarianism. And I don't even know if libertarianism is even the right word of what it is that I wish to spread. I just wish that the standard on which we could all agree it's best to erect a society would be around individual rights. And if that makes me a libertarian or makes me adjacent to libertarianism and the party goals, well, then so be it. But that's the fundamental principle. And I think that's where I've had some traction, is that I'm not just some simp for a party. I think what resonates with people is when you can critique the party, you can critique the movement, but you uncompromise on the foundational principle that, hey, liberty is an important thing, and Enlightenment values got us, to a pretty good place. And if we could, go back and understand the why individual rights are important and recognize the threats to those things, we can have a conversation. And the reason why I think people are resonating with that is that it's not about a party. It's not even particularly about a movement. It's really about just thinking about things deeper and asking the question, what does liberty mean to you? And I think that when you have that conversation, you can start welcoming in people from different political persuasions and have honest conversations about, why less coercive government is good and why more personal freedom and economic freedom is a good thing, and why the coercive government is just a bad thing. Sorry.
Yeah, that, the fact that you're just a person trying to talk about what you think is right, I think is probably part of the reason for the success you've seen. Can you just talking about Clubhouse a little bit? Can you, just for those that may not know what it is, explain a little about it?
Yeah, so it's an audio app so it's social media, but it's all audio based. And what it allows you to do is you create a bio, tell people a little bit about yourself. Some people tell a little more, some people tell a little less. Then you get to create an icon, like, a lot of people put a photograph of themselves or some picture that they think identifies with them. And then the only other way that you can connect with people is through your voice communication. You enter into rooms that people host on various topics. You title a room on whatever you want to talk about. And the conversations that have led to massive growth of the club that I created, or co-created, I should say, Healthy Debates, was designed to have conversations about current events, politics, philosophy, things like that. And the titles are around, conversations about, is capitalism evil? And I noticed that, the way that you title something will draw a certain crowd in. And the big piece of the success of the app, for rooms that get big and where conversations really thrive, is to resist the temptation of creating an echo chamber. Now, I've been fortunate enough to bump into folks like yourself on the app where we agree with things, but where the real magic happens is when folks like us are in a room with people that don't think like us, and we're able to have a conversation where it's unfettered. You allow them to share what they believe, why they believe it, and then you get to counter them, challenge them, and then put your position out there and allow them to do the same. They get to challenge you. And that conversation is very unique. It doesn't happen on Twitter. It doesn't happen on Facebook. And it allows real ideas to break through.
Well, I agree with that. I think it's great what you're doing, because that's where the magic happens, like you say, is when you're in a room where people disagree with you, but you have to have some sort of common standards of communication, so that when you disagree with them, they don't blow up at you, and it doesn't become, this just ridiculous debate like you saw with Biden and Trump yelling over each other. So one thing I'm curious about is, how do you How do you make sure that the debate flows and doesn't become just this hot mess?
Yeah, we really only have two rules in the club, and the first one is to stay on mute until it's your turn to speak. If you're confused about that, the moderator will let you know when it's your turn. So that's rule number one. And then rule number two is no personal attacks. If you can limit those two things, talking over each other and personally attacking each other, then we can deal with actual ideas. Now, it's some of that is easier said than done, and that's why moderation can become a challenge, especially when the rooms start getting larger. But when you start getting really interesting people that are on this app, that pop into your rooms, that draw massive crowds, people like, podcasters like Lex Fridman will frequent the rooms. Former CEO of T-Mobile, John Legere, will jump into the room. Grant Cardone, who, a lot of people follow him. These folks jump into it. Peter Schiff, that's another guy, right? When these guys get into a room, everyone wants to hear what they have to say. And what makes it magical is now you have a conversation with these people that are, you have a captain of industry having a conversation with a college student. I mean, where else do you get that? Like, you're not getting that on Facebook. Just not doing it.
Yeah, and I think there may be something about the vocal aspect of it that makes you kind of listen to the other person versus some sort of angry screed you wrote, and you're just looking for the best comeback instead.
Absolutely. Well, and here's the thing: bad takes happen too. We're all guilty of this. And you get immediate feedback. If you say something that the room disagrees with, you're gonna get a chorus of boos, and you'll even get these instant messages in your quote unquote back channel that will tell you that, like, oh, I disagree with what you said, and then the conversation evolves. The other thing that I've noticed, though, is it's really helpful in learning how to communicate certain ideas. I'm an unapologetic capitalist, and I'll say that to anybody. But I will say that if I'm really trying to win somebody over that is anti-capitalist, I'll talk about free markets. And the term free market, for some reason, is not the same trigger that the word capitalism is. And so if I'm talking to somebody with the intent of really understanding what their grievances are, what their understanding of economics and what it is that their worldview that they would like to see in terms of policy prescriptions, you can start shaping your own language to be able to get deeper into a conversation by avoiding the triggers. There are times when I don't mind triggering people because the word capitalism, I think, is so misunderstood but so typically what I'll do is I'll use capitalism in the room title to get people, you get the people that are anti-capitalist that want to show up so they can critique it. And then you have the supporters of capitalism that want to come in to defend it. But then the language that I'll use is I'll replace the word capitalism in the conversation with, let's talk about free markets. And while capitalism and free markets are slightly two different things, one is the creation of wealth and one is the exchange of wealth, it's a good enough framework to start having a conversation where defenses go down. And once the defenses go down, you get an opportunity to explain to people why organizing a society in a way where people are free to succeed or to fail is a good thing. And you could start addressing some of the tropes that people have, and the critiques that they have that really have nothing to do with, what supporters of capitalism would want to defend.
Great. You seem to be getting to principles of persuasion, and the same thing applies to selfishness and using self-interest instead.
Oh, absolutely. And the self-interest piece for me is like, once I got on the app, I was having conversations out of self-interest for entertainment purposes, because it is entertaining. Anyone that's not familiar with the app should definitely jump on and just entertain themselves, if nothing less. But then you start connecting with people that are really smart. You start learning things. And now that's in my self-interest. I'm actually utilizing this app to learn. And then the big thing is you begin connecting with people. And those connections are important. the three of us met, or at least I met the two of you on the app, and there's a lot of connections that I've made that way. Like I said, Spike Cohen is somebody that I met on the app, and since then I've been able to connect with him in real life. And these are relationships that over the last year or so being on the app, I don't think I had the proximity to people like this, and so it's opened a lot of doors. And that's the self-interest piece. You can entertain yourself, you can learn, you can educate, and you can network. Again, I find so much use out of it that I spend quite a bit of time, and I pretty much abandoned most other social media because of it, because they just don't satisfy me in a way that allows me to to have those human connections.
Now, you talked about the two rules in your chats. You said that the first rule is to stay on mute unless it's your turn, and then the second rule is no personal attacks. And I think it's that second rule that's really hard to moderate. It's even in like literary or written forums where people are just passing messages to each other on a public platform. How do you identify a personal attack? And then, because some of them can be pretty subtle, and then someone takes offense at some subtle personal remark someone made, and then that blows up because then they respond with an even worse personal attack, and it just kind of gets out of control. How do you identify when there's a personal attack going on, and then how do you manage it or like control it?
Yeah, no, it's a great question, and it's a work in progress to get better at this. But it comes down to listening. If somebody is personally attacking somebody, like legitimate personal attack, I will step in very quickly. I will mute the person. I'll explain the rule, not just to them but to the room, and that usually sets the tone. What I see the bigger problem with is you talked about people taking offense, because offense is never given, it's only taken. Now, even if somebody intends to offend somebody, you'd have to give sanction to what they're saying in order to be offended. And what I've noticed is that even when the personal attacks are not happening and somebody is genuinely attacking your ideas, people are so connected to their own ideas that they feel that they were personally attacked, and then they claim offense. And so part of the moderation piece is to make sure that you can decipher when somebody's attacking an idea or attacking a person. And if they are attacking the idea, that's fair game. That's what we're there to do. And even if I don't like what they're saying, I want to hear what they have to say. And I often take notes. And if there's not a sufficient rebuttal, given by the room, I'll jump in from time to time and and give my take as a response to what's being said, just to provide a balance of ideas. But typically in these rooms, you're not going to have a real-time turnaround of somebody saying, "Oh, okay, my deeply held worldview is wrong.
Right.
You were right. What a genius you are. Let me change my ways." But what is more likely to happen are when you have hundreds of people or dozens of people, depending on the size of the room, sitting in the audience, they're listening to an exchange. And the person that can make rational points and resonate with somebody, that's where I start realizing that people are getting benefit from this, because you get messages in the back channel like, "Thanks for hosting the room. I really learned a lot." And that really keeps you going with this stuff. But yeah, the personal attacks, I just have to make sure as a moderator, I'm really listening for it. And some of them are tropes that, I learn as I go. Somebody will even point that out. "Hey, that was a personal attack," and I might have missed it. But you learn as you go, and they become easier to spot over time. But attacks of ideas, I'm all for that.
Let me give you a quick example, like a distinction between what I call a general personal attack versus a particular personal attack. So sometimes people will say things like, my critics, they're dishonest, or they're being dishonest, or they're not telling you the truth, or something like that. And they kind of get into the general psychology of their critics. And then there are the very direct, particular personal attacks, like Joe Blow is an idiot, or something like that. So in the general example, there's a whole class of people you're kind of attacking. And then anyone in that class can feel offended by that. And then they might, if they're very emotional about it, they'll maybe attack back and with an idiot remark or something like that. So what do you do with the general attack? And how do you deal with that? Because sometimes it's wrong, but maybe sometimes it's kind of on the right track. How do you deal with that?
Yeah, well, it's easier for me because I belong to a political party that is criticized by everyone, and quite honestly, for good reason. And so, if I'm in a room and somebody says, "Oh, the problem with libertarians," I'll engage with that, and I'll say, "You know what? There's something to be said about that, because there are some libertarians that have some really bad ideas." And then you can turn it around and say, but isn't that true of pretty much any political movement? Aren't there some bad ideas that exist within the Democratic Party? Aren't there some bad ideas that exist within the Republican Party? And then you can even extend that into religions and and other areas. And if you can acknowledge that, like, some criticism is fair, and then some criticism is unfair, and then try to get someone to be as specific as possible with their critique rather than a broad stroke. If somebody's broadly criticizing something, I would just ask for specifics, so then we can dive into that, and maybe we agree that they're right, because not all criticism is wrong. And I think if we deal with it directly and understand, like, where is this coming from, like what is the actual problem that you're illuminating, and heck, we might walk away from this going, yeah, I agree with you. And oftentimes that seems to be the thing that happens when you can get specific about a problem. I'll give you a specific that happens on Clubhouse. Race comes up all the time. And then when somebody says, well, let's talk about slavery, I like to poll the room and ask, hey, is there anybody in the room here that's pro-slavery? And then nobody's pro-slavery. So it's like, okay, so now that we all agree that slavery is abhorrent, like, can we move on? And so sometimes it's just a matter of, like, getting into those specifics of, like, what is the actual challenge that we're trying to overcome?
That's a good way to knock down straw men, because they always attack the straw man, right? And there's really no one there who has that position.
Let me just switch gears a little bit. The healthy debates, I mean, how much of the growth do you think is because people are just so much, they're almost desperate for debate and hearing different ideas as the world is doing what it's doing?
Yeah, well, so most of Clubhouse, unfortunately, is an echo chamber, and there's very few rooms. Healthy Debates is not the only one, but there are a few clubs and rooms that will be moderated in a way that really are designed to allow everyone to be able to engage. And I think that is something that people have missed out on. We've told people for years, there's two things you can't talk about: politics and religion. And here we are in Clubhouse having a room saying, let's talk about religion, let's talk about politics. And we're learning as we go. And some people don't know how to do it because we conditioned them that we can't talk about it. But now, once we create a platform where, yes, we can talk about it, and we're going to do it respectfully. And if you can't do it respectfully, then you won't be able to participate in the conversation. And then once the conversation becomes really interesting, even the people that have a tendency to be trolls on other platforms, if they wish to engage in those conversations, they're going to have to clean up their act in order to participate. And the real trolls, they don't stick around long because they know what's going to happen. They're not going to be allowed to make personal attacks. That's one. B, whatever they say is going to get challenged, and they're either going to have to show that they're not up for the challenge, or they'll do something that is even more disgraceful on the Clubhouse app, is they leave the room when they get challenged. And so there's nowhere to run when you're in a debate online like that. And so if people want to really exchange these ideas, they have to stand in front of it. They have to say what they believe. They have to challenge what you believe, and they have to be willing to hear this stuff out. And if they're not, there's a leave quietly button that they could press. And but I think the reason it grows, and it's up over 17,000 members now, I believe the real reason for it is that it's one of the best places that I've found, like in real life or on social media, that like encourages different viewpoints. And the only time that I will really shut something down is if somebody comes in with some really inflammatory stuff that just doesn't have a place in any civilized society. For the most part, I would skew towards free speech absolutism, but there are some things that I disallow.
Yeah, I happen to think that, your laissez-faire attitude may also be part of the reason for the growth, because I mean, I see people like Lex Fridman, they kind of follow you around. They're just, they like you as a personality, come across as gregarious. And I think we need to see more of that in terms of libertarian and other liberty movement representatives.
Yeah, well, I've also noticed this, and the Lex thing is interesting. He's become my buddy on that app, and he does follow me around. And he even said in a room that aside from the rooms where he gets to speak Russian, that the Healthy Debates Club is his favorite club on the app. So that's a huge compliment from him.
Hey.
And I'll take it. I love that. What I think is important though is that it's not about me. Like, sure, I can facilitate the conversation, and there's something to be said about that. But the interesting part is finding people from different parts of the world that have these different perspectives, and they're able to share ideas that you may not have been exposed to. Somebody will mention, they'll make a point, and then they'll say that they got some information from a book. Then we're able to post the book above the page where everybody can see this book that somebody is referencing, and it's helped to curate my Audible playlist. I'm doing audiobooks lately. So I would say in the last year, I have not downloaded a book to listen to that wasn't a direct recommendation from a user on the app. And half the time it's from people I disagree with because I want to understand what it is that they're reading.
Sure.
I just have a quick question maybe about the nature of Clubhouse as a verbal communication platform. And I noticed, in the beginning, I didn't use it a lot because you can't replay it, or it's not recorded. It's like hard to access conversations that happened a week ago. But now they have the replays. Do you use the replays, and what do you make of the sort of impermanence of the conversations you have? I know like they're kind of private and they're not up on YouTube or something like that, and so where everyone can just access them at any time they want. Do you think that's better for the purpose of your debate forum, or do you wish that it was more like YouTube?
Yeah, so I actually turn the replays off when I launch these rooms. I've tried both ways. Once they released the replay feature, and people seem to self-censor themselves when they believe that they're being recorded. It's an interesting phenomenon. Not all people, but there are some people that will avoid rooms where replays are on. And if your goal is to have an unfettered conversation, if you're choosing an option that's going to create an environment where some people don't want to speak or maybe even enter the room, I think that that's a net negative. And so unlike a podcast or a YouTube video, this is one of those things where you have to make it. it kind of reminds me a little bit more of real life, where, you know, if you get invited to a party, you have to go, right? You know, and I guess nowadays people will, you know, record videos of what they do at a party because everybody's got their cell phone in their hand. But for the most part, if you want to experience it, you have to be there. And I think that function, first of all, it creates a more of an urgency about, well, I have to be there or I'm going to miss it. For example, you know, when I'm doing a room and I've got somebody like Peter Schiff, right? This is somebody that, you know, people pay money to talk to, and he jumps on the app and just wants to shoot the breeze. It's pretty cool. And then you're bringing people up that are critics to talk about Bitcoin and gold and all of these different things. And then when Peter decides, oh, I've got a dinner date, I got to leave, and he jumps off. If you missed it, you missed it. And I like that. You catch it while it's hot. And I also think that also is responsible for why people in that particular club will, as soon as you open a room, people want to get in there early because it's not something that they can just go and grab the replay from later.
I'm interested in some of the Clubhouse anecdotes that you've experienced. I've seen some in your Healthy Debates room, at least a few of them talk about how they went to sleep overnight and they woke up with the phone in their hand and the room was still going.
Yeah, there's a lot of sleepers on the app. If you're on late at night, people will just they'll start tuning out of the conversation, and next thing you know, they're not participating at all. Some people will leave their microphone open, and you can tell that they're sleeping because they're literally snoring. And a good moderator will put them on mute or maybe even move them to the audience so you don't preserve their dignity a little bit. But yeah, sleeping on the app, that's actually a frequent occurrence if you're on the app late at night.
That happens on live streams too on YouTube. And people will fall. Sometimes there's these drunk streams that they do, and then they just pass out. And one guy his mom came in, and they found out that he lived with his mom that way. So it's kind of funny.
Oh man, that's incredible.
I'm trying to think. There were ones where I came into some rooms. You were saying, true to your spirit. One of your quotes I had was, "If you're not Rose, get on mute." And you also had a self-effacing, share this question: is Putin a thug or is Roger an idiot? And I'm Roger.
Yeah.
I think that's part of the endearing spirit.
The sharing of the room feature is shamelessly trying to grow the size of the room so you get more people packed in there, because the more the merrier. But when you give people the freedom and flexibility to be fun with it, and like if you disagree with me, tell it, share that you think I'm an idiot, and it's great when you read the insights on it, and people have literally shared, say, Roger is an idiot. I laugh at that stuff, and being able to laugh at yourself on this app will save you a heck of a lot of grief, because the people that are on there taking themselves serious are the ones that are, I think, missing out on a key component of this thing.
It's kind of you violating your second rule. You're attacking yourself.
That's a great point.
Well, I think what you're talking about is desperately needed in the liberty movement. We're planning to do a show on, grudges and schisms, and so much of it is from people taking themselves too seriously and having this minor disagreement where we're like 90% in agreement on libertarianism, but that guy's the devil. I
think with everything, it's usually a line drawing exercise, right? So if I were to define libertarianism as the polar opposite of authoritarianism, and you were to draw this out on a piece of paper and were to ask, well, how libertarian are you? Well, I think there's a movement that thinks it's sexy to be all the way up until the line where we need no government. And the anarchists seem to be the most vocal members of this of the entire movement, and they're not the majority of it. They're just the most vocal members, because it's exciting to exaggerate your position. When you start exaggerating your position, there's more fanfare that goes along with it, because doing anything moderately it just doesn't have the same swag. And so where I get frustrated with my own party and with people within it is the extremes that they're willing to go to be more libertarian than the next person. And maybe the biggest frustration, you guys would appreciate this, is when they invoke people like Rand and make it sound like Atlas Shrugged was an example of anarchy. They need to read a little deeper and think about the fact that, in Galt's Gulch, there was a judge, right? And
Yeah.
so there's still an order to things. And I think that extreme viewpoint is one of the things that harms us. And I wish if Murray Rothbard would have kept his big fat mouth shut and not antagonized Rand, I think the libertarian movement might have done a little bit more, because I'm like, the people with sense seem to be more Randian than Rothbardian.
Not a Rothbardian. I'll get this down for my intel sheet. No, but that's a good point. I do think, when you start talking about Lex Fridman's friend, Michael Malice, he is someone that kind of is an anarchist and an Ayn Rand fan. And, he might say that the judge was just, privately set up by the people and that we'd all be self-governing. They seem to think that it would just tie into this kind of, nice land with no government, where it actually ends up clearing the decks for someone like Stalin to come along.
Absolutely. And look, I think Michael Malice is massively entertaining, and I read his books. I listen to him when he's on podcasts. I think he's fantastic. I also think he's wrong about a great many things, and that's okay. Because he's doing what he wants to do, and I'm with that. But when we think about like this idea of anarchy and the version that he describes, like there's this concept of the non-aggression principle, which I'm a bigger fan of John Stuart Mill's The Harm Principle, because I think you should have to prove harm. Like if somebody's not harming somebody, where's the foul? I think that's a better model. But if we went with the non-aggression principle, the big question that I have for the anarchists that are in the movement is like, well, who enforces this non-aggression principle? And I'm seeing this in real time in libertarian circles with the stuff that's going on internationally. We have, you have Putin, who is a thug, going in and into a sovereign nation and, and attacking and killing and creating a war completely unprovoked. Like I don't accept this idea that NATO expansion is these countries that join NATO did it voluntarily. It's a voluntary association. It's the most libertarian thing you can do. But there's folks that will defend or refuse to condemn Putin because they think that, well, we shouldn't be in entangled alliances. Well, you mean voluntary ones? These were voluntary alliances. But more importantly, who the heck is going to enforce the NAP? And when I start looking at, even with NATO, we're having a hard time containing a thug who's the head of a nation that has an economy that's smaller than the state of Texas, but yet you want to set up militias that are going to somehow adequately repel the violations of the NAP that could come from modern nation states. It makes no sense at all. So definitely not an anarchist.
All right, good. Now, within that, I am interested because I think some things you've alluded to tells me we may be somewhat in line on this, that I see a grander strategy of trying to unite the disparate parts of the liberty movement as much as possible. Maybe the anarchists should be included, maybe not, but just as in terms of, taking your strategy of just, trying to be as persuasive as possible and open to as many people that can just agree on a few basic things about, at least wanting to stop the growth of big government at this point and even start to, deregulate some.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So I think that as a pragmatic tool, I think the Libertarian Party works locally. We can look at what they do in states like Pennsylvania. In 2021 in November, they won 155, I think, local elections. Now, that is a massive accomplishment. And state and local offices is where the Libertarian Party should focus their efforts. If you have a philosophy that wants to decentralize government, it makes no sense that you would want to run for positions in a centralized government. And so I do not support the LNC. That is the Libertarian National Committee. That is not a group that I align with. I support my local, well, we had a county affiliate that blew up, but I support my state affiliate. And the reason why I support the state affiliate is because we can get things done locally. And we don't have to have these pipe dreams of like, hey, let's go vote for somebody that's going to get 1.2% of the vote. I'm not willing to spend my money or my time in a losing effort. I am like the culture of winning is an important concept. I come from the sales background. And so there's nothing worse than losing. And so if you know you're going to lose, put together a strategy that could win, or go find a different battle to fight. And so nationally, until we break the two-party system, I would prefer to have a no-party system, to be perfectly candid. But a good step would be, maybe changing the debate commission, allowing third parties to debate. I think that would be helpful. But at the end of the day, it's about moving the ball forward. Deregulation is important, but most importantly to me is recognizing individual rights. And I see infringements on both sides. Republicans infringe on certain rights, Democrats infringe on certain rights. And if we could just get to the point where people understand the importance of that, then maybe we don't get laws like the Patriot Act, and maybe we don't get people coming after our Second Amendment right, or making challenges against freedom of speech. We just need to infuse the value of liberty. And I think it's going to be a long battle, because there's forces that are working against that believe that equality is more important than liberty. What they don't seem to realize is that there's the only way that you could ever get equality would be to enforce so much coercion that you make everybody the same. And in order to do that, you would have to make everybody equally miserable. And I think liberty goes a lot further to give people the opportunity to be free to succeed or fail based on their own merit. And so if we could just have that debate in this country and move that culturally before the government acts, I'm not here to make policy prescriptions. I want to change the culture, so then smart policy prescriptions are just a reflection of that culture. And the culture is that individual rights are a bitchin' thing, and that the Enlightenment thinking was the way.
The main struggle we're having regarding liberty is, liberty for whom and for what and why. We have individualists and we have collectivists, and they don't mean the same thing when they talk about liberty. One means liberty for the individual, and the other means liberty for groups. So or privileges for groups, or freedom for groups. So they don't think in terms of the particular human being. They think in terms of their class. So how do you make that the main topic of discussion and start discussing the battle between individualism and collectivism?
I think it starts with a conversation. These conversations on Clubhouse are a start, but they have to happen everywhere. They have to happen, at the bar, at the coffee shop, at school. And these conversations we have to listen. What is it that you're hoping for? And when I'm talking to people that are, mentioning historical injustices in this country, they're not wrong about the call outs that they have about historical injustices. The issue that I like to point out, though, is what was one of the preconditions that had to happen in order for these historical injustices to happen. And it would be my argument to the collectivists that the very first thing that happens before any massive atrocity in human history takes place is we begin categorizing people and lumping people in groups. Oh, the natives, we're going to take their land. We're going to commit genocide against them. If you have skin that is darker than mine, we're going to enslave you. We're going to have unfair practices around home purchasing. All of these types of things are horrible injustices that do need to be dealt with. So we have to listen to it. But the conversation does need to shift to root causes. What gave rise to that? The thing that gives rise to those things is collectivist thinking. If you treated somebody like an individual, try enslaving individuals. It's going to be a lot more difficult than being able to say, here's an immutable characteristic in which we're going to vilify them, and then we're going to commit some horrible atrocity. When you do it, when you deal with people as individuals, it's a far more difficult task. And I think that the problems that people point out, which I am very sympathetic to, and I think that we should not ignore, we need to talk honestly about what gave rise to that. And I think that's where the indictment on collectivism starts, is that every atrocity in human history can be, tracked back to collectivist thinking.
I think part of what makes your approach work is that you have a genuine curiosity about what others have to say, as opposed to, I see some objectivist leaders, especially the Orthodox branch, they want to get on people's shows while still dissing them at the same time. They're just kind of see them as like a means to an end of getting more listeners or followers. But you're actually just having conversations and I think there's a genuineness that people even like Lex Fridman and Peter Schiff and others can see.
Yeah, well, I would hope that comes through, but let's be honest, we all have our biases. I'm not, I certainly have biases, right? I have my worldview, and it's been shaped by what I've read. But what if you have a critical mind? I think Rand talks about this, a critical mind being better than an open mind.
Right. Or an active mind.
Right. With that critical mind, you need to be critical not just of other people's bad ideas, but your own bad ideas. And what I love about having honest dialogue with people is that I'm not going in there to just let every piece of garbage that I hear penetrate my brain. You have to have your filters up for, hey, does this make any sense at all? But you do have to listen to it. And so you have to listen to it. You have to filter it for what is honest, what is true, what is helpful, what is pragmatic. And from that, you begin to learn some things, but it's a process. And I do have biases, and I'll expose some of those here. Is before I started talking to people about some of these issues in depth, I didn't understand the critiques of capitalism, right? Capitalism is something that I will unapologetically defend and have been for 30 years. But what I didn't know was just the depth of the criticism. I read Marx and I thought, okay, he makes these critiques that I think are interesting but incorrect, and his prescriptions lead to far worse outcomes. What I didn't realize is that there are sections of the population that are on the far right that don't believe in capitalism for completely different reasons. And so I've learned so much about what the actual critiques are. And what it all boils down to is that people aren't even criticizing capitalism. They're criticizing the current system that they call capitalism. And when we can get into an open, honest discussion about, well, what system do we have? And does this even resemble the free market that capitalists would dream of? And what does it really resemble? It looks a lot more like Mussolini and his economic fascism. And when we start getting into a conversation about what the critiques that people have, their critiques are usually pretty honest. The government propping up big business is not capitalism, right. And it is problematic. But
and it's happening.
We just have a language barrier. And so I think that's one of the big things in these conversations is just really understanding what is the heart of the critique, and then asking ourselves, is there any merit to that critique at all? And then if there is, then we respond to the honest part of the critique, with an honest response. And I feel like we've had great success in helping people better understand what a free market is and what capitalism is and why it's a good idea for everyone, why there's peace that comes from it, why there's prosperity that comes from it. And aside from the fact that it's incredibly efficient, it's also incredibly moral. And when you get into that argument with somebody that comes from a position that they believe it's immoral, it's an exercise that's slow, but people come along once you really express what the root of capitalism is, and not just the system that we have that people are calling capitalism.
I think one of the underlying issues is that capitalism is a relatively new social system. So not a whole lot of capitalists understand it very well. And so why should we expect socialists to understand it very well? It's mostly been around for like 300 or 400 years. I don't know exactly when you would date its origin, but it's brand new basically in comparison to collectivism and the morality of self-sacrifice and all of that. So they've had a long history of thinking in terms of a collective or group or race. And now we're just trying to teach them this new way of thinking of society, basically. So it's going to take a lot of effort, I think, to change the culture in a capitalist direction.
Yeah, I think that's true. I do think the way we talk about it is important, though. There are some capitalists that I believe have the wrong messaging. And when they're talking only about the prosperity piece, they have to understand, well, how does that hit the ears of somebody that's not prospering? And when you make the moral case and you let people understand that, look, this is a system that levels the playing field, that as you work hard and as you build capital, you can grow that capital and you can participate in this system. And when you walk people through the morality of it, it allows people to embrace it in a way that I think they reject when they only hear, somebody that's benefited from capitalism talking about capitalism is very different than someone explaining the underpinnings and the ethical framework of it. And that's where the success of changing people's hearts and minds come from, is to getting them to think about it a little bit differently and how they can participate, where they fit into that. And so I do blame some of the messengers of the past around delivering why capitalism is so great, and focusing solely on the prosperity piece and not on the ethics of it.
You brought up earlier that getting certain strategies for getting more people into the room based on what you title it. Do you have any tips generally for people starting Clubhouse rooms to get more engagement?
Yeah. The whole idea that that you're going to attract somebody just by being straightforward in your title is not always true. If you're looking for the title itself to draw people in, you have to think about what, like, for example, if we're going to talk about economics, I would frame something in a way that disagrees with the mainstream narrative, because people are more interested in joining a room that they disagree with than a room that they agree with. And the people that do join the room that they agree with, it's going to be a small room and it's going to be a boring. If you want an exciting room, you get the room going with a narrative that goes against the grain. So if I wanted to start a room talking about Rand, I wouldn't say, let's talk about how great Ayn Rand is. I would say Ayn Rand was a philosophical moron. And then you would have everybody would pile in that wants to crap on her, right? And then you'd have the defenders that would show up, and now we could have a conversation. Like the more inflammatory towards, especially if on Clubhouse you assume and my assumption would be that there's more people that don't know Rand. I like by saying something negative, the people that don't know are going to want to understand, well, okay, who's this person that we're crapping on today? The people that do know and dislike her and are critical of her are going to show up so they can, opine about their feelings about it. And, and then the three of us show up with, well, hey, why don't we like ground this into reality? And the issue that you have, though, is if you're going to use a clickbait title, and this is the important thing, you could do the most clickbaity title you want, but you better focus your moderation on having a good conversation that is fair and balanced. And one of the ways to do that is to open and honestly acknowledge multiple times for all of the listeners that the title was clickbait, and let them know that let them know that, like, hey, it worked. You guys are here now. This is the conversation that we actually want to have. Thanks for coming.
Open clickbait. That's interesting.
If someone is part of the Healthy Debates Club and they have an idea for a debate, they can send you a back channel or?
Yeah, that's the way a majority of the rooms begin. We're doing a room tonight, 5:00 Pacific time, about are food deserts a myth? And that was not something that I had even thought about. Somebody wanted to talk about food deserts. And again, even the framing of that, are they a myth? What that's speaking to is anybody that believes that food deserts are not only not a myth, but they're a huge problem in society that we need to fix. They're going to show up to tell us what they know, and then we can actually break down, well, what is a food desert? And that requires I have to go do research of, like, what is the definition of a food desert? Has anybody studied the results of these things? And so that's going to be a fun room, actually, because it's something that's been included in the there's a Clubhouse mission to dismantle white supremacy, and everything from the patriarchy to capitalism and even math and science is kind of thrown into that thing.
Right.
And one of the favorite words that people use now to point to ongoing effects of white supremacy is this food desert thing. And so tonight we'll be talking about what are food deserts, and are they the problem that some people are making them out to be?
I don't even know what a food desert is.
I'll give you a brief definition, and then you can show up and get the rest of the conversation. But check this out. It's defined by two characteristics. Number one, it has to be a population center that has a poverty level of 20% of the population living under the poverty line. So it first points to high levels of poverty. And then the second part, which is really interesting, is that, and it's bifurcated by if you're in a rural or an urban center. If you're in a rural area and you live 10 miles away or more from a supermarket or large grocery store. If you're in an urban center, if you live more than 1 mile away from a large grocery store or supermarket. Interestingly enough, they define supermarket or large grocery store as a store that does $2 million in annual revenue. It discounts any other type of store that might be smaller than that. It discounts farmers markets. It discounts a community that would be growing their own food. And it makes this assumption that if you don't live within a 1 mile radius in an urban center of a supermarket, that somehow you're being deprived of food equality, is what they would call it, right? And here's the interesting thing: you go and you look at studies that have been produced. The average American drives 5.2 miles to a supermarket, but they have a definition that says that you're being that there's food inequality if you don't have a supermarket within 1 mile. So it doesn't even jive with the normal patterns of how people go to a supermarket, and it ignores all of the other factors. And then finally, they have tried addressing this by building supermarkets in these so-called food deserts. And what they found was that the eating habits don't change at all. the people are still buying the same things that they were buying before. And so it goes back to supply and demand. You show me a community that wants fruits and vegetables and farmed meat, and somebody's going to show up and deliver that to you. It's all supply and demand. And so this whole thing is a myth, and I intend to ruffle feathers today.
See, so this is how the Marxists are going to get their claws into the food industry.
That's exactly right. Yeah.
I mean, Amazon and my supermarket deliver now, even if it's 10 miles away.
Right.
So,
yeah.
But they're not counting that, because if the supermarket is more than 10 miles away in a rural area, you are in a food desert, is provided that the poverty level is 20% of the population is below the poverty line. So it's a really odd definition where they've decided they can create a term and that really doesn't mean anything. In fact, I'm planning, my father and I are going to go on a road trip and go to these areas that are deemed food deserts, and we're going to film buying fresh groceries, just to kind of put a visual aid to the fact that this is just untrue.
That'll be for part 2 of the debate. That's great. Well, Roger, I want to thank you so much for joining us. I'm thrilled with what you're doing on there. I assume you're just going to keep growing things on that platform the way you were talking?
Yeah, that's the plan. And I'll be starting a Substack soon too. What I want to do is every room, I want to write an opinion piece that I'll put on a Substack, and that way the club members that are so interested in what my opinions on those things might be can get something that they can read, share, distribute, that sort of thing. I think that's the next evolution of getting the message pushed out, is to start a Substack. Great.
William, final thoughts?
Yeah, just thank you very much for coming on. It was a pleasure talking to you. And I'm glad there are people out there like you who are injecting Ayn Rand into these conversations and trying to make a change. You know, I like your idea of, bringing in people who disagree and then having debates with them. I think that's how we're gonna change some minds. So thank you very much, and I hope to talk to you again sometime.
Thanks. I'll see you around the app. You two have a great day.
Thanks, you too. Well, this has been the Ayn Rand Fan Club. I'm Scott Schiff along with William Swig, and we will see you next time.